Well, things might be turning, as the Finance Minister says, but from an economic perspective, this has been the most trying period for New Zealanders in at least 15 years, and for many, the most trying of their lives. If you need any reminder of just how tricky our economy still is, I urge you to take a walk up on the corner of Simon Street and walk down the length of Karangahape Road this afternoon and count all of the retail for lease signs. You'll be in the double figures, I reckon, before you hit the first set of traffic lights. Heaps of Kiwis are facing tough choices at the moment between relieving immediate financial pressures or saving for the future. But there is also opportunity in this moment, significant opportunity. And as our economy rebuilds, that opportunity will allow New Zealanders to better position themselves for economic uncertainty in the future, as well as the fiscal demands of retirement in an age where statistically we are sticking around a whole lot longer. Our first panel of FSC 2024 is growing the financial confidence and well-being of New Zealanders. Will you please welcome our panellists to the stage? Very good. So I will introduce each of our panellists and ask them a question just to kick things off. And once again, if you have questions that you would like to put to the panel, please submit those and I will get to them very shortly. First up, Michael Weston is the CEO of Partners Life. From your respective vantage point, how do you define financial resilience?
Look, I think financial resilience is an interesting one, and I've been thinking about it, somewhat philosophically in the lead up to this, given that there's probably an aspect from a policy setting perspective where we want to have people to be individually resilient, but we also want collective resilience at a societal level. And I think the piece which is important at an individual level is obviously physical, mental and emotional, and that's really about your ability to deal with change. And financial underlays all of that, but that's where we start to get into the overlap with what we need from a social resilience perspective. And then I think that extends into some of the things that we just heard about from Minister Willis, like climate adaptability, and also having a stable rule of law and society, and one that is secure. So quite a complex and broad definition, crossing both individual and collective resilience.
Very good. Jane Wrightson is the Retirement Commissioner. Jane, speaking from your vantage point, how do you define financial resilience?
I knew you'd take the big picture view. Well done. I'll take the little picture view, which is simply being able to survive black swans, to not have to worry about money on a daily basis. It's quite simple to me. Up on the screen, you'll see a sneak preview of the new National Strategy for Financial Capability that my office has been putting together for the last 2 or 3 months, and has spoken to many dozen people consulting on the way through. One of the key goals is around resilience, because it was a thing that a message that came through over and over again from all of you. So the focus on resilience will form part of the collective work we do as a sector to help improve. Really important stuff, this. If you're interested in the Nat Strat, talk to me or any of the Retirement Commission team here, because we partner with a fairly wide range of organisations to think collectively about how to shift the dial. And collective work around resilience, of course, is incredibly important, because none of us can do it on our own.
Nat Strat, I like that. Anna Scott is the CEO of Smart Shares. Thanks for being with us, Anna. So speaking from your vantage point, how do you define financial resilience?
So from my point of view, I think you look at the perspective of where you come from and everything that's been part of your journey or where you work in the community. And quite often, I think, particularly in this industry, we talk about terms that are quite technical or a little bit particular to us. So when I thought about that, I thought that really what it is, it's a personal perspective, because money is very personal. So we talk about consumers, but actually it's about people. And to me, resilience is how you are choosing, and so it's about choices. It's how you're choosing to spend the money that you earn, and how you are able to make choices at times of need, and Jane's Black Swan events to be able to see you through that. And one way of thinking about it is that in your whole life, you will spend every single dollar you earn. And the choice really is what you spend it on and when. And I think that is about making those resilient choices.
Campbell Mitchell is the CEO of Fidelity Life. Kia ora, Campbell. How do you define financial resilience?
Quite similar. I think of it through a couple of different lenses. One is personal, and everyone in the room has a different perception of resilience. For me, growing up in a family without resilience, a family that struggled to pay the bills, worked week to week, was unable to absorb the shock when it came to the front door, whether that be a car breaking down or a leaky roof, that gets you to think about it and understand the value of it and how hard it is without it. The second, as a CEO of a life insurer, this is part of what we do, right? We provide protection, and that enables resilience from families and businesses across New Zealand, and it's an incredibly inspiring, a very lucky, fortunate role to have. And thirdly, I look at it through the lens of New Zealand Inc., where I'm seeing increasingly a broadening divide of the haves and have-not. And I think what we're seeing here is that resilience is not shared equally. And when we think about the challenge for this conversation and our conversations over the next couple of days, I'm really curious about what, as a group, we're able to do to spread resilience more evenly across New Zealand and New Zealanders, irrespective of where you're born, how you're born, postcode, gender, ethnicity, etc.
I'll speak from personal experience here over the last 6 months. So my wife was facing job insecurity, right? And I sat down and was doing the numbers and thinking, we're going to be fine in the scheme of things. But if we have to take money anywhere from the household budget, I looked at my life insurance. And I was like, man, do we really need to be... Do we need to have that right now? Is that an absolute priority for us? And I'm sure that my family was not the only one doing that. Now, fortunately, my wife kept a job. That was all okay. But I wonder if each of you can reflect on some of those choices that Kiwis have been forced to make, and how we can support them in making choices between the day-to-day cost of living crisis and stuff that might help to set them up in the future. Campbell?
Sure, and like Jane, I've got a slide. So I've got an example, and I'll answer your question, Jack, and that is to really search out good advice on this. And I hope you and your wife spoke to a financial advisor to get advice, as opposed to a friendly uncle who might have done well in the past. We had a really tragic story of, it was in the media, stuff reported a couple of months ago, of a woman who was having that exact conversation, Jack. She and her husband, 2 young children under 2, and they couldn't make the costs stretch, their money stretch the costs, sorry. And so they had to make a choice, and like yourself and your wife, the choice was life insurance. And this story appeared where a couple of months after cancelling their life insurance, Ella was diagnosed with grade 4 bowel cancer. And that is a tragic story. Our claims team are quite invested in looking after customers and New Zealanders, and they researched the story and found out that even though her policy was under her maiden name, she actually had a policy with us. And due to the timing of it, we were able to restate the conditions of that policy, so that the obligation that we had made, that she had cancelled, was met. And we've taken the slight burden off, what is a very tragic story still, so that there will be support for her husband and her 2 young boys under 2. But she had options, and those options would have been improved with good advice. Good advice about making choices. Could have been premium reduction, could have been a number of changes that would have made it more affordable. Because we really understand that it's incredibly tough out there, and we're getting calls every hour of every day from people who can't afford their policy, and we're having conversations, and our advisors are having conversations about what the options are.
Jane, do you have thoughts on that? On the tension that a lot of New Zealanders are experiencing between paying for the day-to-day essentials and trying to invest in their future?
Yeah, we see that through our customer base on Sorted, the independent site that we run. It is a challenge for those in the advice sector, and I've said this before. All of us in the broader sector say you must get advice, don't make any big decisions until you get advice. Finding an advisor and developing a relationship with an advisor continues to be a huge challenge for average New Zealanders, I think. And I kind of put that challenge back to the sector going, this is where the power of collective thinking becomes really important, a bit of Nat Strat kind of thinking really, but how can the sector as a whole build up trust levels to the extent that seeking financial advice becomes a norm? I know all the business issues around it about people not wanting to pay for it, yada, 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 yada. But they're just excuses. There's a trust issue in this space. Only the industry can sort that out, and only the industry, I think, collectively can address that properly. Because obviously, if you get advice, you'll be told to, and advised through your financial issues, looking at your disposable income, blah, 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 all of that. But they need to know you're independent, they need to know you've got your back, and they need to know that the solution is the right one for them. And as you know, that takes time. But it's a comms challenge for the sector as much as anything else, in my view.
Michael?
Look, I think would echo everything that's been said. Seeking advice is a critical first step, but you've got to be comfortable with where you're getting that advice from. We need stable regulation to support that and transparency. I think the other piece which is really important is each individual, and it's a part of the resiliency question, needs to also do their own bit in terms of literacy. And that's a combination of education, but also self-directed learning, because let's face it, in this space, knowledge is power. And we've got ample resources in terms of the access to information on the internet. And once you can start with that and form a question base, as well as getting comfortable with your own financial position, you're also better equipped to enter that advice conversation. And I think that's something that we should reinforce from a perspective of New Zealand Inc. in terms of how to improve financial literacy across the board.
I think that's a really good point, but it's also a really big question around how do you get that advice and what is our common and consistent messaging. And so realistically, we talk about it needs to be independent, but a lot of access to free advice, as it were, is part of a service and you're already with a service provider. So it's difficult to get that independence. And so I think as a community and an industry, some of that greater than just our own businesses aspect is really important, where we can get to common language that starts to be easily understood, and that actually goes back to in schools, or where are we starting that journey, because one is about understanding so that you're informed to make your choices, but the second is also about trying to teach and instill that discipline. Because if I think about, we talk about what you should do and what you pay for that, but at the times when you truly need advice, normally that comes with a price and you're already struggling from a money perspective. So why would you then pay more money when it's not
Yeah, it's the ambulance at the bottom of a cliff in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and interesting when I think about my children's journey on my own, through your growth and with your parents, generally you get introduced through your family network to an accountant maybe or a lawyer, but it's not commonplace in New Zealand to also get introduced to an advisor. It's not a common part of our culture yet to understand. So if we're lucky enough to buy a house, then we know that we need to pay a lawyer to help us do that, but we build up a little bit of a nest egg and we want to think about how we invest that. We don't acknowledge that it's important to pay for advice, and there's value in that, and I think that's part of where we need to get to over time.
The independence thing is really important, obviously, and that, just putting another little plug for Sorted. What's on Sorted was we're not selling anything other than good information. Will generally speaking be the kind of information and advice that advisors are giving, just not personalised. So you can use Sorted as well to go, if you don't believe me, go here. They're not selling anything. And if Sorted is saying something different to what you're saying, that's a good conversation starter or explanation point to your client, So that site has use for the industry as well as consumers. And you're right about the language. We published a de-jargoning money glossary about 18 months ago, which I encourage you to use. It's starting to get picked up quite nicely. And the whole point of that was, again, the industry helping us collectively say, can we have common terminology here to help consumers? And it's a brilliant piece of work that I've not seen replicated anywhere else in the world.
Sorted is, just to total with that, Sorted is an exceptional resource. It is really, really, really useful and extremely user-friendly, even for people for whom any sort of money conversations make them terribly nervous. Let's talk about that cultural element. Financial literacy versus, say, maths education. Do you observe changes? Is New Zealand progressing? Is money becoming more mainstream? Campbell?
I think we at Fidelity Life believe that education and financial literacy is a great way to level up in terms of the inequities across the country. So did it feature recently with education policy? Well, there was a lot of focus on math, which is great, but not so much about financial literacy. So it's a stepping stone. So my view would be there's a lot more to do. I think we should be focusing on it, because when you think about making sure that we have equality through the country, then education that includes financial literacy is absolutely critical to level up.
Yeah. Anna, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going to steal Michael's phrase, because we've talked about this before, but maths goes with money.
Yeah.
And that's when it comes back to personal. And so I do think, and Michael's got far more to say on that, but it's super important that it becomes a real life skills experience when we teach, and it's not just maths for maths' sake.
Do you think, just on that point, sorry Jane, do you think on that point that the democratisation of things like, share trading platforms has assisted in introducing a new generation to financial literacy?
Absolutely. And I think that has absolutely got far more people involved and thinking about, do I buy my cup of coffee or do I buy some shares, or what else can I be in? But that's also fantastic because people are now interested and enthusiastic to learn more. And then it's part of us helping to shape the discipline around that with the common language and the learning, because otherwise we go too far, we risk going too far in that gamification where it's still real life money that we're talking about and long-term life choices.
Yeah.
I think when talk about sources of advice, in a recent piece of research which was called Advice for Good, it looked at where people got advice. Now, not enough get it, and when they do, they source it through about 1/3 through a financial advisor, one quarter through a financial advisor, more than that through family, and on the inside lane, coming up quickly, is social media. Yeah. Right, so 20% of people in the last 12 months that we surveyed through Advice for Good had sought and received their advice through social media, which is both concerning and an amazing opportunity. We could place the financial future of our people in the hands of TikTok, or we could think about how do we use those channels that people are just defaulting to at least lead them to good financial advice.
Are there ways to do that authentically? Because that's often the challenge with those sorts of platforms, right? As good as I'm sure you are recording TikToks and things, Campbell, is there something that you think we can do better there?
I think actually it's okay to be authentic, Jack. It's fine. It's average, authentic. That's good. I think the trick is to engage and start a conversation and hopefully move the audience to somewhere where they can have a better conversation. So if we do not have to start the conversation on a platform, then people don't hear us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 2 teenage daughters, they do not go to a news site to get their news. They don't go anywhere other than the channels that they use. And if you're not on them, you're not heard. Yeah. And if you're not heard, then where does that advice come in from? Who's giving it?
Jane, how do you think about the cultural element when it comes to improving financial literacy?
Oh, you're absolutely right that you have to go where the audience is. It's my former life at New Zealand On Air. Go to the platforms, get on TikTok, just drive them back to where you need to go. The government's interested in financial education. That's the good news. And there are some conversations just starting to happen around what should be happening in schools that's better than what we've got now. There's a myth that says there's no FNED in schools. That's not true. What there isn't is a coordinated approach to it so that every school's got some and they're teaching the same sort of thing. In the new maths curriculum, which we worked on with Ministry of Education for quite a while, they've now got something called financial maths. So they're getting there. It's slow, and there's an advisory committee working directly with the ministry now, trying to get a more pragmatic approach. What we want to do is see it next in social studies. So once you get financial education involved in both maths and social studies, you'll get all the kids. And then the question is who, how, and where.
Yeah, Mitchell.
Yeah, look, in terms of education, obviously I've only been here for about 6 months, so I'm probably the least qualified to talk about how this can work. But what I did see spending the last 10 years in Asia is that maths and money are very much taught together. And I can only relate to my own experience where, at school age, my recollection is learning quite a lot of differential calculus, regression analysis. And yes, that's used in my industry, absolutely, but it's not used in all industries. And it wasn't until I really did my MBA, which I was lucky enough to be able to do, that I actually learned Warren Buffett's eighth wonder of the world, compounding interest. And for me, they're the things, those practical things that we need to make sure are being taught earlier. I don't think that's just a government issue. I think that's something that we need to be thinking about as just members of society and as corporates. And at Partners Life, we partner with Banker and provide the risk module, which is a financial literacy program in schools. 30,000 children have had access to that over time, and that's something that we're committed to promote because we think it's for the benefit of all.
Maybe that's the solution, right? Like the day one of year 7 or whatever it is, the old Form 1, every student gets $10 in a compounding interest account. They're encouraged to check that account balance every month, and by the time they leave at the end of year 13, ka-ching.
I think it helps, absolutely. I'm not sure if that exact design is the right one. I think the other thing that helps as well is, allowing people to access the retirement and KiwiSaver system earlier. I think the moment that you start to see accumulation happen there, you start to get interested, and you also ask the questions about, where is a percentage of your salary going? What does an employer co-contribution mean? And that coupled with a basic understanding of investment markets and also compounding interest can really stoke a fire. And I know that was helpful for me.
Let's follow that thread, Jane. KiwiSaver. How should it change?
We published a very detailed report on KiwiSaver earlier this year, and if you haven't read it, it would be good if you did, because we did quite a deep dive into what should happen. Obviously, it hasn't been looked at properly since it's been invented. The trouble with successive governments, it's the same with NZ Super, is that they tend to tinker rather than look at it holistically. But one of the key recommendations we made, which will be no surprise to you, is that the default contribution rate has to go up. There's no question, both for employer and employee. I was very keen on 6%, 6 plus 6. My staff talked me down to 4, saying let's not tell them to oversave. But nonetheless, the thing about defaults, as we know, is that they tend to be a kind of permission thing. People think, oh, well, if they're saying 3 plus 3, that'll be enough then. I'll be happy in my retirement. And we all know that's not true. So I'm very hopeful that the government will pick up some of the recs from our paper shortly, and or allow us to continue digging more into how these changes could be made in the upcoming 3-year review that we write on the retirement income policies per se.
I also wonder if it quite seriously is one of the policy settings that we could consider in order to bring all of that overseas talent back. I go back to my friend in Australia who I was talking about, saving at 12%, matched at 12% by his employer. Why would he choose to come home? I mean, when you look at those numbers.
Because it's better here.
Yes, but it's poorer. It's a lot poorer. Yeah.
So, look, it's a great example, and I thank you for asking the question of our minister, because I worked in Australia for 6 years, came back and worked for 10, and my super in Australia was still bigger than it was in New Zealand.
Yeah,
and that was a very tangible example of the missed opportunity of us having such a low, albeit more immature program, but a very low level of saving.
Yeah.
And I think that talks to the need for the KiwiSaver review. And I know she nicely dodged that. You pushed well. But I think we talk about that as a contribution, and yesterday's masterclass was all about 10 plus 10, so that would freak your staff out, Jane. But I think everyone agrees that it needs something in terms of an objective, and I think about that in my recent experience as a new CEO. What you want for your business is actually the same as what you want for your KiwiSaver. You need a strong vision that holds the test of time, like where are we heading with what desired outcome? So even if the review thinks about that, because absolutely you could talk about contribution rates, but you could also talk about there's a completely different tax incentive structure between Australia and New Zealand in how we run our KiwiSavers. So $1 in goes much further than it does Australia than $1 in here. And that's the bit around tweaking around the edges. I think you need to have a really clear objective of what's your vision, what are you trying to achieve and why, and then you line up things that help you do that.
What do you think is the role for employers and improving the financial resilience of their employees? Is there a leadership role that employers could take that perhaps they're not at the moment?
Yes, and yes and no. I think that employers have a big task ahead of them in terms of their general social responsibilities to their employees, and we talk about well-being and whatever that means to everybody. So in that education and discipline, at Smartshares we have a workplace savings scheme that's almost gone out of fashion over time, but the shoots of that are coming back, because how do you provide that discipline and framework for your employees? And you can do that as an employer in terms of having part of your benefit scheme be part of a discipline of all sorts of investment, whether it's KiwiSaver or insurance, etc., and disciplines. So I think that is one thing that could happen.
Yeah, and I think it's not yes and no, I think it's yes and yes. Employers do have a responsibility, and many of us in this room are employers. Firstly, there is an opportunity for employers, particularly through KiwiSaver, to talk about a little bit of financial education stuff, or point them to courses. We run Sorted at Work for individual employers who want to upskill, provide opportunities for upskilling for their team. We talked a little bit about this in the women's session this morning. There are things employers can do to help address the gap that turns up in women's savings lives. There's many, many things that can be done. I think with employer advocacy, the conversation always starts with, nah, can't afford it, nah. And I don't think most employers are generally like that. Most employers go, I want to keep my good people, I want to treat them well, I want to see them progress, and so there are things we could do to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, there are increasing responsibilities on employers, and you're right, there's two ways of looking at that. One is that it's a really important investment in your talent and a great retention tool, and the other one is it can be quite expensive. I think there is a yes and yes, and I'm keen to continually innovate around looking after employees, and making sure that you are taking the opportunity to invest in your employees in a way that, again, helps all New Zealand grow. If you, by the way, want to go that extra step and get an employee benefit, Fidelity Life has a great group scheme. So don't feel, we've got a booth outside, happy to take all inquiries. And that is an example of helping your employees with their financial literacy, helping them with their financial security and their resilience. And so it is an important scheme, and if you can afford it, it's a great retention tool as well.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there, Campbell. So I'm not sure I can echo that last part. It would seem a little bit disingenuous. But look, I think, as an insurer, we live in a pretty privileged position to be able to support our employees with our own know-how to provide a group scheme. And yes, we also provide one to the market if you are looking. I think, the other thing that we all have a responsibility as employers to do is to make sure that what we are doing in terms of our own employee base reflects the makeup of society from a diversity point of view, and that's being addressed. I think, in terms of KiwiSaver and policy settings, one of the things that I think about, and it's off the back of my experience as well in Australia, is this about prosperity or is this about prosperity and resilience? And thinking about the Australian system, which provides access to group benefits within that and FBT relief, so that you encourage access to a broader health system and defray some of that costs, is something which I find quite interesting. And I think the other thing that we also have to do is, on that resilience front, is continue to think about how we're contributing from a climate adaptability point of view, and I think that's something that New Zealand actually should be quite proud of in terms of taking a leading position around climate-related disclosures, starting to work towards having a strategy and setting targets, because that's another piece of the whole social resilience puzzle.
When you talk about the puzzle, sorry, just go back to that, it's not employers by themselves though, right? And I think that was my bit around the no. It's actually, the puzzle pieces are all of us together, because you've got the government part, the employers, the employees, the other aspects that come into education, etc. So, just alone, that's not going to be enough.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. We've had heaps of great questions from the floor that I'll put to you in a couple of minutes. Michael, you've spent a fair bit of time overseas, including in Cambodia. Are there different ways of working across government and industry from your experience that you think are worth considering?
I think, it's really about, and I think, let me start by saying I think it's great to see that from a political perspective, there is studies being done on overseas markets and what's working and what isn't working. I think, we have a lot of the answers here, but there's also some good examples overseas. I think, one of the things that we do have in our favour is despite the challenging economic times, quite a strong and developed middle class. Not every market has that, and I guess relating to that sort of Cambodia experience, and where we were trying to develop the insurance system, you also need a supportive health system, and so between government and private enterprise, insurers were, as an example, having health clinics as a part of their branches. And that's really to make sure that those two things can develop hand in hand. And I think the key story there is an open dialogue, and I see days like this as a part of that, and also making sure that the policy objective is clear so that everyone can work towards that in tandem. And the Cambodia example was very, very clearly aligned at building resilience at both an individual and a social level.
Okay, I'm going to take some questions from the floor. First of all, a question for the life insurers. What role do you see regulators playing in aiding consumer resilience and prosperity? Campbell.
I was looking away then. What role? It's a critical role, right? Because there's this real tension between everybody, here and in this room, wanting to do the right thing and the best thing from a customer and a conduct point of view. And the other side of that being, a lot of additional work, process, and regulatory requirements, which are really time-consuming, take a big, absorb a lot of your SMEs, your people who are at the best at their job, and obviously funding. So I think the pragmatic approach that's been talked about is the way forward. We all want to do the right thing for customers. That is absolutely fundamental to why we're here and why we stand beside our customers in the time of need. And we need to do that as pragmatically as we can.
Your thoughts?
Look, I absolutely echo the sentiment around a common alignment around doing the right thing by customers. That's the reason why we exist. I think in terms of the point that we talked about for advice and conduct before, I think the regulator plays a critical role in providing trust. And I think the other piece, which is critical for insurers, is really around solvency. You need to be able to be clear that the insurers are capable of meeting their obligations as and when they fall due, and that's something which I think is very beneficial here around having that strong regime.
A question for you, Jane. What has the government really said about KiwiSaver change recommendations? Are they engaging or simply kicking the can down the road?
Yeah. They didn't say no. One of the things we didn't discuss in the report, which occurred to us a little later, is that one of the systemic problems around KiwiSaver is that the governance isn't clear. So my minister is the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, so that's who I report to. However, MB has a policy function and nothing else. IR, of course, administers KiwiSaver, so has views on what can work, and it all then heads back to the Minister of Finance, who generally speaking doesn't want to spend any more taxpayer money than she possibly can, because that's what MOFs do. So nobody is in Cabinet pushing for this at a unified level, and I think that's a bit problematic. So we have said, here's a whole bunch of really good ideas. We know that Inland Revenue is looking at a few of them. I saw one pop up in the paper last week as being a tweak they're going to do, and I'm going, tweaking is not the answer. This is the trouble. So you won't hear us shutting up about it anytime soon, I don't think. What's been helpful to us is the work and thinking we've done with the FSC, to be honest, because the more the industry has one message that aligns with ours, or at the very least, if we have different views, we just go, there's one view, there's another view, you're the boss, you pick, doesn't really matter. The clearer the through lines are, the better it is. I know that the current minister is now worried about what employers will say, and so has dispatched one of your members off to go and talk to employers to see what they say. And employers apparently are reasonably relaxed, so that's good. But the push for action tends to be a bit slow, and the messaging needs to be consistent. And what we can offer the industry, of course, is that the industry can generally be dismissed as, well, you would say that anyway. Of course you want to increase contributions, it's your business. When you get impartial observers like us going, what's best for NZ Inc. and what's best for New Zealand consumers, when those messages align, it's quite powerful. So keep pushing.
I think that the Māori unemployment rate has increased at 4 times the national average. I think both Treasury and the Reserve Bank are expecting unemployment to quite significantly rise into the first 2 quarters of next year. The question here, when we're thinking about the most vulnerable communities who are struggling day to day at the moment, what is the sector doing to build their cultural competency, as in the sector's cultural competency, in serving these communities who are perhaps less represented in this room today?
Well, Fidelity Life is court-owned by Ngā Tahu, and it's a fantastic ownership. Half owned by the super fund, so providing certainty for New Zealanders in their future when they need it in retirement, and also investing heavily in the education, health and well-being of the iwi. And that's an important thing. So when you mentioned before about should we in year 7 be giving everyone $10, well, at Ngā Tahu, when a new baby is born, they get a $1,000 grant, right? And that grant comes from the investment returns, including the dividends that Fidelity pay them. So for us, we talk about growing for the good of New Zealand because we want to make sure that we are there from a social impact point of view as well, and that's very important to us. That includes our community programs, which are things like Outward Bound and Bellyful, where it really is driving to people and giving value to people who are disadvantaged, where there isn't equity and where there isn't resilience. So I think there's a lot more to do, and that's why we've chosen a push to really level up, and that very much includes cultural communities, and we'll do that with Ngā Tahu as one of our owners to make sure that together we can make a good impact for those disadvantaged communities.
And I think your point there around the doing alongside, not the doing to. And so that working alongside is very important because it brings that personal perspective, those outcomes that you're desiring at that community level that reach the right people for the right intended outcome. And so we have a whānau saver program that we work with a number of iwi throughout New Zealand. And again, it's recognising and creating a scheme that works for them. So when do they want to contribute for their group? What are the rules around that and who gets to access it when and where, and how can we grow that together so that it's a suitable product for the people who need to use it. And I think that's the secret again. It's the working alongside.
This question here, Shamabil Yaqub commented yesterday, we should stop blaming a lack of financial literacy for our challenge serving customers. The Retirement Commission's de-jargoning money resources excellent. Would life insurance companies consider something similar, or perhaps using plainer language in their products and sales?
I think, certainly from my perspective, absolutely. I think we've got to continue to simplify policy wording, continue to simplify underwriting, and where possible adopt common language across the industry. Certainly, my experience coming to New Zealand is that underwriting works quite differently in some of the other markets around the world. And one of the things which I've been thinking about a lot is we do work with the same reinsurers, and is it possible to bring some of that learning into the New Zealand market? And that's something that we're thinking about at Partners Life at the moment.
Yep, don't disagree at all. That's I think when you think about the proportion of New Zealand families that are protected by life insurance and associated products, it's not much more than a third, and it needs to be a lot more than that. And that means making it accessible and making sure that we can be better at talking up the value of that protection and resilience, and ensuring that it's available to more New Zealanders.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to throw one last question to each of you, and it regards collegial competition. So what we can do across the sector to balance competition between firms whilst also building collective resilience in New Zealanders. And perhaps, Campbell, you could kick us off and we'll work down the line.
So I think this is a good start, right? We've got 600 people in the room. It's sold out. The people standing at the back. I think it's really interesting about working alongside that you talked about before, Anna. This is an opportunity for us to work more collectively. If I look through all the the annual reports and AGMs of all the businesses in the room, there's awesome work being done, but it's been done one at a time. And I do believe, and I'm happy to work with anybody in the room about our desire at Fidelity Life to really level up what we're doing and to work with others, competitors, to actually do a more collegial job at lifting New Zealand's resilience and moving us towards prosperity. Because at the moment, if we do, we can't be a prosperous country when we leave a third of it behind. Right? New Zealand will not be prosperous if a third of New Zealanders don't have resilience. So we have to make sure we bring that third of New Zealanders with us on this journey to prosperity.
Anna.
Yeah, I agree. I think the FSC is a great place to start, and we've heard about that today, and Heidi talked about the commitment to being involved in some of those groups. So that's the voluntary nature of being involved, but that's how you do make change. And I completely agree with Campbell that we're all doing our bit, but the sum of those collective parts is actually so much stronger than the individual contributions in that space. And so more collegial competition, or collegial work, right? Obviously. Minister Willis would like competition to stay here. So
it's a balance, isn't it?
It's totally a balance, but I do think that the openness that people have to work together for making a difference is important.
Yeah, very good. Jane?
That's precisely the reason for the National Strategy for Financial Capability. And most of you have been involved in this at some stage, and I hope we've spoken to most of you. But the whole point of it is to understand what the industry is doing collectively, because it's not always seen. People go, they don't do that. And you go, actually, yes, they do. It's here and here and here. But if you surface it through national level projects or bigger goals or the rest of it, then it can help your own strategies by folding, you can fold yours into ours or ours fold into yours, doesn't really matter. But the bigger picture becomes clearer, and the ability to run special projects, which the Nat Strat excels in, that's where the de-jargoning money glossary came from, the ability to do important jobs that individually you wouldn't be able to do becomes really powerful.
And Michael?
Yeah, I would echo the importance of the FSC as a platform. I think they released a study in March of this year which had a pretty astounding stat in it that 98% of people insure their house, 95% of people insure their car, but only 20% of people insure their income for sickness or disability. And for me, the area where we need collegiate competition is around relevance. And to go back to my earlier answer, that's about simplifying policy wording, better explaining the value, because that stat is quite alarming to me from a resilience point of view, particularly given the use of debt financing in New Zealand.
Very good. Okay, I've scribbled down my top points from this session. So first of all, although financial literacy is improving, depending on whether you agree with Shamabeel or not, there is perhaps more space for us to improve there. KiwiSaver is fantastic, but let's make sure it's fit for purpose. There are some improvements that Jane would certainly advocate for. We want to drive access and affordability of financial products, and the industry is doing well but needs to do more to work together so that we have a consistent, coherent message to government and can help to lift the financial literacy of all New Zealanders. Please join me in thanking our panellists, Michael, Anna, Jane and Campbell.